your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Well, Happy New Year. I'm Naveen Day. Thanks for joining us for our Week in Review. If you're in Alberta, you may have noticed that gas and diesel jumped 9 cents per litre. That is because a good portion of the provincial fuel tax has returned. Government officials saying the remaining 4 cents per litre may return at the end of March if West Texas Intermediate oil remains below $80 US per barrel. To chat about this increase in fuel costs is the Alberta Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Chris Sims, who sat down with our very own Hal Roberts.
Chris, how much more is this costing Albertans each time they visit a gas station?
That's a great question. So a year ago, Premier Danielle Smith did the right thing when she fully suspended the fuel tax. So technically, we have a provincial fuel tax of 13 cents per litre of gasoline and diesel. She fully suspended it 1 year ago. Unfortunately now, 9 cents per litre is back on that. So roughly speaking, it'll cost you around $7 or so more per minivan per fill-up now. For a pickup truck, it's going to cost you around $10 extra every time you're filling up your pickup truck. And again, $10 can go a long way. You can get a roast chicken for $10. What's really concerning here is that the fuel tax also hits diesel. And so, of course, truckers deliver everything we eat and use. So you increase the tax on diesel, you're going to increase the cost of pretty much everything in Alberta.
Didn't our finance minister recently say that Alberta has a $5 billion surplus? I mean, the timing of this increase is tough since so many Albertans still have to pay off their credit card debt after Christmas.
Yeah, this is what's the big head scratcher. So politically and personally speaking, a year ago, the premier said she was fully suspending the fuel tax because she wanted to shield Albertans from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's carbon tax hikes and from the problems caused by inflation, again, largely a federal government issue, because people were struggling to afford basics here in Alberta. Those two factors have not changed. People are still really struggling to afford things like groceries and fuel and housing in Alberta. And Prime Minister Trudeau is ready to jack up his carbon tax again in just a few weeks' time. And mathematically speaking, this doesn't make sense either because Alberta has a $5.5 billion surplus right now. They could afford to extend the fuel tax holiday by another 6 months and pay down some of the debt, and they would still have a surplus. So we don't know why they're doing this.
Thanks so much, Chris. That was the Alberta Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Chris Sims, joining us here in Lethbridge.
We will also hear from our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, who will weigh in on the provincial fuel tax. That interview is coming up later in our show. A state of emergency has been declared at the Bigani Nation over the drug crisis. Chief Troy Knowlton and his council made the announcement for the reserve, which is located near Pincher Creek here in southwestern Alberta. The chief says the main culprits are opioids and fentanyl, which are having a devastating impact on the Bigani people. It appears as though overall the drug crisis is getting worse in our province. According to the Public Health Agency of Canada, there were 1,411 opioid-related overdose deaths reported in the first 8 months of 2023. Our city, Lethbridge, ranks first for the highest amount of opioid-related deaths per 100,000 people. As for the Bigani Nation, officials say more will need to be done to combat the drug issue. They're including more drug prevention initiatives, improvements to emergency treatment, and working with agencies to address drug use in the community. The Indigenous Recovery Program in Lethbridge is dedicated to proactively addressing the opioid crisis by implementing a comprehensive and collaborative approach rooted in cultural sensitivity, compassion, and harm reduction. The program's director, Jason Avery, spoke about this Thursday afternoon to attendees at a meeting held by the Southern Alberta Council on Public Affairs. He says the talk was focused mainly on removing some of the stigma associated with addiction.
We always hear the bad about the homeless, the disadvantage to the community. We're hoping that we can change that thought process, not only with the group we're presenting to, but those that will see it on the news, that it's not all what you see. And it's about setting those small goals for those individuals. When we're out walking in the morning, it's about asking them to clean up their camp, giving them that one goal so they have something that they are doing every day, because that's part of their recovery. Is when they're living in the park, clean up your mess, roll up your bedding, and then at the end of the day you have a sense of accomplishment. Even if they're not ready for that step of detox yet, at least they had some sense of meaning to the day.
Avery adds the program is not exclusively Indigenous. He says there are many clients who are either non-Indigenous or newcomers here to Canada. Coming up after the break, more stories from around Alberta. Don't go away. A recent crime spree involving several torched homes across Edmonton is part of a larger extortion scheme targeting members of the South Asian business community. That is according to the Edmonton Police Service in their investigation into at least 18 incidents of extortion that have occurred in their area since October. So far, 6 young men and a youth have been charged in connection with arsons and shootings, but police are asking for people to come forward to identify more suspects. The suspects reportedly target their victims using WhatsApp to text or call and demand large sums of money. If the victims don't pay up, their properties get set on fire. 18-year-olds Hassan Dembil and Manav Heer, 19-year-old Ravinder Sandhu, and 1 youth have all been charged with arson-related offenses for a fire near 48th Street and 174th Avenue on December 19th. All 4 have since been released on a promise to appear. Edmonton police said the suspects have also been known to make follow-up demands for higher sums of money, which reportedly has led to an escalation of violence and even drive-by shootings. No injuries have been reported as a result of the shooting incidences, but they have happened in areas full of families, and police have said the risk of innocent people being injured is high. The family of a missing Alberta man who was disheartened to learn that the truck he went missing in has been moved to a landfill. Marshall Awasa disappeared in November of 2019 from Lethbridge, but his truck was located a week later in the backcountry of British Columbia near Pemberton. As BCN's Jeanette Rocher reports, Awasa's family says they're crushed because his truck was the only thing they had left of Marshall, and they felt the vehicle could offer clues into his disappearance.
That is very much a blow. That was it was a blow.
Those are the words of a grieving mother over the news of the removal of her missing son's burnt-out truck. The truck, which brought so much media attention to the Marshall Iwasa case, no longer sits on the Brian Waddington trailhead. It was removed by a private citizen belonging to the Varsity Outdoor Club, a group of nature enthusiasts who maintain hiking trails in BC. Jeff Mottershead says he single-handedly cut the truck into pieces, then hauled it off to a landfill. He writes about it on the Varsity Outdoor Club blog.
It was clearly something that shouldn't be there.
Mottershead says he took it upon himself to remove the vehicle when it became clear it was becoming an environmental hazard and a trash dump.
It was leaking oil, it was leaking transmission fluid, the battery had burned down, and there was lead all over the place. Having a burnt out truck with debris all over the place and a bunch of stuff thrown in the back already is just a invitation for people to leave garbage. Lots of people who were not aware, they were doing like gangster poses and stuff by the truck, and they end up on Facebook. It's like, it's not the kind of thing that you want to see if you're the family.
And speaking of the family, Iwasa's mother says they were crushed when they found out after the fact because they viewed the truck almost like Marshall's final resting place, even though it's uncertain whether or not he was ever at that particular spot.
It was shocking. It again feels like, okay, another thing of Marshall's has been destroyed. Like we have nothing left of Marshall.
Tammy Johnson says the truck should have been treated like a crime scene and could have offered some evidence.
Once the police lines are gone, then there's no evidentiary value anymore, because what does any DNA evidence or anything mean? Like A, after it's already burned out, and B, after a whole ton of people have left their own trash in the back of the truck because they feel it's a garbage can.
Johnson also says no one ever approached them to ask how they would feel about the truck's removal.
It would have given us an opportunity as a family to discuss it and to say, what is best to do here? And chances are we would have understood.
Johnson says had they known, the family might have made one last trek up there to say goodbye to the truck and her family was hoping to someday put up a memorial at the site.
Did it ever occur to anybody from your group?
I asked Mottershead if it ever occurred to him to reach out to the family before removing the truck.
I guess obviously, based on what you said, I should have consulted with them. Like I feel I blew that, and I'm sorry about that. If they want me to personally put up a memorial, I will do it.
For Bridge City News, I'm Jeanette Rocher.
The Iwasa case is still in the hands of the Lethbridge Police Service. We reached out to LPS about the truck's removal, and in an email they told us that the missing person investigation in relation to Marshall Iwasa remains open. LPS is aware the truck has been removed. The site where it was found was processed by police quite some time ago, and the scene was subsequently released. After the break, our legislative reporter weighs in on the recent increase at the gas pumps. Many here in Alberta have sticker shock thanks to the recent increase at the gas pumps. The provincial government brought back 9 cents per litre of the provincial fuel tax. Finance Minister Nate Horner says they will bring back the remaining 4 cents per litre at the end of next quarter if West Texas Intermediate oil remains below $80 US per barrel, which it is right now. Hal Roberts sat down with our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson. He says for the province, it's a reliable source of revenue, but still quite a hit for motorists, including our truckers.
Yeah, absolutely. 9 cents a liter is going to add up pretty quick if you're filling a big tank. And this goes back to about 2 years ago. I think Jason Kenney was still premier, actually, when the gas tax was first dropped as an affordability measure. Brought the price down a little bit when prices were really soaring. And one of the changes that was made in the interim is that it was pegged to the price of oil. So, if oil was selling for $100 a barrel, gas tax would come off. The government is obviously making more money from revenues, royalty revenues, and things like that. If it drops below $80 a barrel, then the tax comes back. So that's the situation we find ourselves in now. And as you mentioned, I think it could go up further if oil continues to drop, if the government takes a look at its finances and wants some more of this sort of stable revenue source, which of course is, that's a much bigger issue in Alberta politics generally, right? We talk about this every election cycle. Should there be a PST, for example, to have a more stable revenue source, get off the royalty roller coaster, all those kinds of things. So this is, a small piece of what I think is a larger discussion that's sort of always ongoing in Alberta politics. But there's obviously the financial side that we addressed. Obviously, this will cost people, several $100s, I think, per family over the course of a year is what the estimate looks like. But there's also the politics of it. Very hard for a government to raise taxes and not suffer some sort of blowback from it. And it's also put Rachel Notley and the New Democrats in the position of being able to say, look, if we were in government, the tax would stay off. Gas prices would be cheaper if we were around. Did you vote for Danielle Smith to raise your taxes?
Now, Tyler, you recently chatted with Premier Smith about the Compassionate Intervention Act. Now, this is the legislation that would allow a judge to force a person into addictions treatment. Now, you say part of the challenge is trying to build it in a way that it will resist a court challenge?
Yeah, it's almost certain to face a court challenge. Does that violate a person's rights to force them into drug treatment, for example? Whether or not it survives that court challenge, I couldn't say, but almost certainly, I would bet my little all that there's going to be some sort of charter challenge against it. So there's that. There's the legal side of it. The other logistical issue that really comes up is, do we have the facilities for these people? When you talk to addictions medicine people and professors and things like that, what they often say is, look, I'd love to get more people into voluntary treatment, but we just don't have the bed space, just don't have the experts, things like that. So that's one of the things I asked the Premier about. And she said, well, we've got about an 18 months runway. This will probably get up and running in 2025 sometime. And in that period of time, they're building 11 facilities across the province. There are post-secondary institutions, some of them sort of trades colleges, some of them universities that are sort of turning out people with the requisite skill set to work in these places. So lots of big questions, I think, about how this is going to work, whether it survives a court challenge. But certainly there's these logistical things that are happening currently that are going to be crucial to the success of the program, regardless of what happens, I think, on the legal side. So it's going to be very interesting to watch not just the the legislature discussions that come up when this is finally introduced, but also just the logistics of it. How are they going to put this whole system together? What's it supposed to run like? And that is, that's something that was promised back during the election campaign. It's something that I was watching for the past 6 or 7 months. And it does sound like that should be coming at some point in the new year.
It sounds like we may be seeing an Alberta NDP leadership race sometime this year, Tyler. Party leader Rachel Notley has been a little cagey about when she may actually resign, but it is expected to happen at some point in time. Who would be some of the contenders? Would it be maybe Sarah Hoffman, David Shepherd, Kathleen Ganley? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, those are sort of three of the names that I hear bounced around. I don't think there's any clear front runner yet. Obviously it would be a little bit early for that. Not a whole lot of chatter from within the NDP that I've heard on who might be the person that they would, the majority of caucus backs or something like that. But I would expect, we'll see 3 to 6 sort of people enter the race, similar to the size of the UCP leadership race in the summer of 2022. So that is going to come. It'll be very interesting to see what sort of interest there is in that. The NDP had a very, very good election showing in May, even though they lost. Large opposition, real influential part of the political scene right now. And it's going to be very interesting to see not just who runs, not just what interest there is, but then what does the party look like post Notley? She has been the face of this party, the brand of this party for so long. It's going to be a very interesting time for the Alberta New Democrats.
There's more to come from Tyler Dawson after this short break. A new report says that Alberta's GDP is going to contract this year. Now, the province led the country in 2023 with a 2.6% growth, but high inflation and debt-to-income ratios are putting pressure on household finances. Our GDP is expected to drop to 1.2% in 2024. In part 2 of Hal Roberts' interview with Tyler Dawson, Tyler says mortgage renewals will be a catalyst to the slip.
Still growing a little bit, but certainly not at quite the rate that it might have. And part of the thing that's going to matter here, I think, is when mortgage renewals come up. Obviously, a few percent. If you were one of the people who got an ultra low mortgage rate during the pandemic when you bought your place, and you're now looking at a 5.5% or 6% or 7% renewal rate, that's obviously going to have a pretty significant impact on household finances, debt to income ratio, those things. So I think it's, in some ways it's not surprising that there's going to be some economic challenges ahead. It'll also, I suppose, depends on what unemployment looks like, what the oil and gas sector looks like, price of oil internationally. Lots of factors obviously going into the way that GDP turns out at the end of a year. But I think for a lot of people, they're certainly looking at their household finances. Everyone is this time of year after a very expensive holiday season. But yeah, there certainly seems to be some economic challenges ahead for the province.
Tyler, let's talk about Alberta's already strained relationship with the Trudeau government. Will we see more fighting this year between the two in regards to Bill C-69, the increase in the number of electric vehicles, or our province's fight against the single-use plastics ban, which the Supreme Court didn't agree with?
Almost certainly. I think there's about 5 things that Danielle Smith wants to fight on, and you named almost all of them, I think. So, this is a perennial thing in Alberta politics. Jason Kenney fought with the feds. Even Rachel Notley fought with the feds. Danielle Smith, I think, has ratcheted it up a little bit. We saw in the last few weeks, for example, her saying that Stephen Guilbeault was sort of traitorous in his behavior regarding environmental policy. So there's very much been an increase, an upping of the ante in terms of the rhetoric. Will there be some more legal challenges? I certainly think that's a possibility. I couldn't tell you what the grounds would be to challenge the electric vehicle stuff in court, but that's certainly something that Premier Smith has talked about. So we're absolutely going to see, I think, more rhetoric, more butting of heads with Ottawa over the next year. A little bit less clear, I think, whether that's going to translate into more legal battles and things like that. But there's no doubt that this anti-Ottawa rhetoric is going to be a staple, I think, of what the Premier is up to for the next year.
How about more instances of bringing forth the Alberta Sovereignty Act? Could we see that?
Well, it's a good question, right? Because it's only been used the one time, and that was on the electricity regulations. So I guess the question sort of becomes, what are the issues that the UCP might be really upset about? And also, what are the issues that they think the Alberta Sovereignty Act could be used on, in the sense that what the Act does basically is allow provincial entities, bureaucracy, things like that, to not cooperate with the implementation of federal policy. So, on something like the electric vehicle rules, what role does the province even have in that they could maybe step away from? So I think they may use it as more of a symbolic gesture in some of these cases. The practicalities have always been a little bit less clear, perhaps, than the rhetorical benefits of the legislation. So I think there will be lots of talk of it. I certainly think people will be asking the Premier why she's not using it on various issues. Does it get used? What effect will it have? That, I think, is a lot less clear.
Now, you also spoke with the Premier about how the UCP is going to address parental rights and kids' pronouns at schools. Tyler, the UCP said at their convention that they would bring about a resolution. What did Premier Smith have to say about it?
Well, it's really interesting because she has fairly socially liberal views, and to some extent this put her in conflict with her caucus, I think, and some of the party membership. So that's the reason why I asked her about it, because I think it's a very interesting personal and political situation for the Premier. What she said is that her view basically all along is that kids should feel safe, they shouldn't feel like they're being judged by the adults around them, and that she also feels that any sort of laws or system built around these issues is going to be one that includes sort of the whole of the family. So you can read between the lines a little bit there, and that certainly suggests that she feels that students should, if they make decisions like these in school, their parents should be notified. Obviously, we saw in Saskatchewan in the past few months and in New Brunswick that this has been a challenging political conversation for politicians to have. And so I think Danielle Smith's trying to walk a little bit of a middle ground here in terms of protection for students from perhaps abusive situations at home, and also respecting the parental rights that she has also long said she supports.
Coming up after the break, stories from around southern Alberta.
People have approached us from the downtown BRZ and have asked, how can we be part of the solution?
Welcome back. Lethbridge police wrapped up their Christmas Check Stop campaign. Police say 16 impaired drivers were removed from our roads over the course of the month-long initiative in December. In 2022, 7 impaired drivers were apprehended, and in 2021, there were 12. Officials say around 1,250 vehicles were checked during the 2023 campaign. The Christmas Check Stop was a collaborative effort involving the LPS, Alberta Sheriffs, RCMP, and the Lethbridge chapter of Mothers Against Drunk Driving. It appears as though the Christmas Hope campaign was a huge success this past Christmas season. The initiative served 3,364 adults, along with 6,150 children. Some of the organizations which took part in Christmas Hope included the My City Care Shop of Wonders, Lethbridge Family Services Angel Tree, both of our food banks, the Salvation Army, and Volunteer Lethbridge. Now, speaking of volunteers, those with the Christmas Hope campaign say none of this would have been possible without the help of 1,386 volunteers who put in almost 12,300 hours of work during the month of December. Way to go. There were a lot of hot-button issues last year which impacted the lives of those who live in Lethbridge. Our very own Hal Roberts sat down with Lethbridge Mayor Blaine Higgin to discuss some of those very important issues. Have a look.
Now let's start off talking about the financially struggling Lethbridge and District exhibition. City Council voted to provide some emergency funding in the form of $250,000 an operating grant. Now there's also another $950,000 set aside for more emergency funding. The Lethbridge and District exhibition announced that it has also parted ways with its CEO, Mike Workington, and there's also going to be a new interim board. Quite the shakeup here. What's going on? What happened here?
This is obviously not a city organization, so it's something that we are been sitting on the sidelines, kind of conversing with them, making sure that we're this facility is within our community. So if there's any issues, we would like to know what is happening. And so we have worked with them for quite some time, quite a few months, and I've tried to dig deep into what is exactly happening there. And it's been a struggle. They've had some financial concerns for a while, and in light of COVID and some of the different interest rates and inflation, many things have put them in the situation that they're in today.
Now, Lethbridge and a number of other municipalities, including Red Deer and Wood Buffalo, have been putting pressure on the province to decentralize EMS dispatch. Many are still concerned that ambulance wait times are far too long. Where do we stand with that in that relationship with the province and decentralizing?
That's a great question, Hal. And I have met with Mayor Gondek from Calgary, as well as other mayors that are within, that have similar concerns. And so it's Gondek from Calgary, us from Lethbridge, and we've got Red Deer in there and Wood Buffalo. But Wood Buffalo, we've seen, has now is got their EMS dispatch back, and so which is something that we met here last week to try to figure out exactly what we're going to do if we're going to push forward with that same idea and wanting to get ours back.
Now, Lethbridge City Council established a cross-functional task force on lawlessness. How did it go after the initial meeting of the Downtown Lawlessness Reduction Task Force last month?
Well, initial meeting and 4 since then, if you can believe it, Hal. This is how we really want to tackle this. It's been great. You know, we've got the right players at the table right now. People have approached us from the Downtown BRZ and have asked, how can we be part of the solution? You know, many people will be out and they will complain about issues that we have within our community, but to have folks like that come forward and ask how they can be part of the solution, we were excited to be able to set something like this up, and we have worked very well with them to date, and we have the right players at the table.
So with some of the meetings which have already taken place here, Mayor, what are some of the biggest concerns heard, and how are we really addressing crime in the downtown core?
How are we addressing crime? Well, you know, one of the things that we had done last year, we put in place, it was the encampment strategy. So council put together some dollars, I guess, if you will, and connected with our administration to go out and find a way to deal with the encampments that we had within our community. They got out of control. And this wasn't just our community. Many communities had this concern. We decided to hop on this as quickly as we could, direct administration to not only remove the encampments, but to offer the support that many need within our community. So it wasn't just dismantling somebody's home as a tent would be for many, but it was also to make sure that we put these folks in communication with the social service providers in our community. And
after the break, I had a chance to chat with a 100-year-old amateur theater group. Stay with us.